And we are live. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Appreciate everyone who is planning to spend the time with us and those that may watch this at a later date, maybe on demand. My name is Jason Serrato, the Vice President of Talent Center Transformation here at Eightfold. And I am honored to be joined by the infamous Robin Schooling from Humoriso, the Director of HR Insights and Innovation. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you, Jason. I am delighted to be here chatting with you today.
I've been looking forward to this. I know we have been looking forward to setting something like this up for quite some time as we've crossed paths on the various trails and conference scenes and various gallivanting around the HR jet set, as it was. But here we find ourselves at the beginning of a very tumultuous year. 2025 2025 in the world of HR. And I've always had this joke where I've been doing this for some time, you've been doing this for some time. And for all the time I've spent in HR, I've never had a single year where someone said next year is going to be easy.
No.
We've always said next year is going to be a difficult year. And it seems like every year just gets all the more challenging. So I'm really excited to kind of pick your brain and have a conversation with you and field some questions from the audience along the way. But wanted to see just what was top of mind across these topics as we talked about what's happening with the labor market, with all the disruptions and uncertainty that's going on. What's been a common theme over the last several years around empowering internal mobility with the people that are already in your organization. You can't have a conversation for more than 5 minutes without talking about skills.
Right.
In some way, shape, or form, we wouldn't allow that to happen, right?
Right.
As part of that, underlying that is always, what does it mean to move that forward? And a big part of that is learning. So we're going to talk about what does it mean to learn in this new world? Because in many cases, learning is being turned upside down and disrupted as well. And then an underlying part of this, and a big part of why we're happy to be having this conversation with you, is how does technology enable some of this? Because a big part of it is technology is disrupting this, but technology is also enabling this, right? So those are the topics that will guide us along this journey today. We promise we will bring you home safely. We may take some twists and turns along the way, but we will get there. Before I do so, I wanted to mayor. We also want to kind of pick your brain and see where you are along this journey. So we do have some poll questions. So kind of stay close to some device that will allow you to answer the poll questions, whether it's a mouse or some device, a keyboard that will allow you to answer the questions that we ask. But before I do that, I also wanted to give a chance for Robin to give us a little bit of background on your role at Humoriso and maybe some of the conversations you're having with some of the organizations that you support and kind of why this abstract and these topics were intriguing to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Humoriso is a full service HR consulting firm. So we offer everything from HR and payroll outsourcing and tech consulting and tech solutions that are kind of under our umbrella as well. We do RPO, we have contingent search. We really meet a vast array of needs. And personally, the marriage between myself and the work we do at Humoriso is, I think it's perfect, because I've long been all about kind of humanizing HR and humanizing the work experience, and I guess that's sort of where I get on my soapbox and raise my fist sometimes. And so working with the varied clients that we work with and kind of communicating with them, we get to do that because we focus overarching in the work that we do on how do we empower people, how do we empower organizations, how do we make sure that their HR or their talent strategies, their people strategies, and their people operations are integrated, seamlessly integrated into their business objectives and to their business, into their vision. And so that's really kind of what we set out to do, whether it's no matter the industry, no matter the size of the organization that we're working with. And so, a lot of the things that we're talking about today, I would say, really every one of them has come up in some way, shape, or form over the last, especially I'd say the last 6 months. I think as we, to your point, we like to look to the future, and we like to pontificate and make predictions in our industry, right? And it's been an interesting end of 2024 as we look ahead to some of these things. I think I see, well, as we dive into them, I think we'll see. I think the labor market disruption, I'm kind of glad we're starting with that, because I think that's an anchor in a lot of this stuff on these other things we talk about.
So let's take off on the journey. So I want to start with a poll question. So the first poll question for the audience here is, what is your biggest focus area for 2025? And we've given you a couple options here: addressing labor market disruptions, empowering internal mobility, shifting to skill-based talent management, building a learning culture, and harnessing technology to drive success. So these are the topics we plan to touch on today, and just wanted to see of these areas, which ones are kind of your key focus, and understand that you may be trying to address all of these, but if you had to choose one and we had to lock you in, what would your choice be? I always love watching the poll live because it makes me think of a horse race. Yeah. One of the things that we talk about frequently in the conversations that we're having is how you need to kind of think, manage, and measure differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for all of these conversations, that's a big underlying premise of this. A lot of these conversations aren't necessarily new, but the challenge, the way you approach them, and then how you actually measure outcomes and success are what's being disrupted and turned upside down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is why, we may be using some of the same words, but how we're defining them and how we're approaching them and the tools we're using are all changing.
Yes.
Right. So
yes.
Interesting to see the results here. Give it a couple more minutes, one more minute or two. If you had to take a guess, where do you think people will fall?
I think just because I think the folks that we have sort of talked to about this, I think we might get a big piece, a group saying harnessing technology.
Okay.
I think
well, let's see where it landed.
Ooh, well, I was
a three-way tie.
There we go.
Three-way tie.
Yep.
Harnessing technology, shifting to skill-based talent management, and empowering internal mobility. So I love that. Because in many cases they will overlap, and that just shows the connectivity between what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's kick it off. Addressing labor market disruptions and strategies to close the skills gaps, address industry shifts, and attract and retain top talent. No matter what you read, no matter who you talk to, no matter what survey, poll, consultant, white paper you're downloading and printing and grabbing a cup of coffee to snuggle up with, attracting, retaining, understanding top talent is always at the top of the list. It's always at the top of the list. And I think part of the problem is we're seeing disruption in a variety of ways, and we're seeing disruption traditionally within our four walls, just based off of discontent and burnout within the way work is getting done. But we're also seeing significant disruption geopolitically, with immigration, in the labor market, with technology, with the way work is getting done, with the changing labor mix and the changing job mix. And all of this is happening all at once.
Yes.
Right? We are definitely going through a shift, a big transformation. So I want to take that first piece first. and talk about something that we just uncovered in our annual talent survey. So here at Eightfold, we do an annual talent survey, and as recently as the end of the summer, so August into September, we surveyed 500 HR leaders at the VP level and above at companies with 5,000 or more employees across 6 different countries. And we asked them, you know, how do you feel about your efforts and your confidence that you've given tools and resources for your employees to grow in their roles? And with 75% confidence, they felt they had done that. But we had also asked over 1,200 employees, full or part-time, in those same 6 countries from that same audience, that question, and 82% of them said they were looking actively for a new job. So regardless of what's happening outside of the 4 walls within the organization, there's a disconnect between effort and understanding and content and awareness of where I can go. So we've been kind of looking at this misalignment kind of between all the best intentions and kind of understanding of who I am, what I can do, and where I can go, and trying to help organizations in making this meet in the same place in the future. But Robin, you're not as close to this as we are. What is your reaction to this?
Yeah, and again, it's a perfect storm of all these things again happening at the same time, because we're simultaneously at this moment where we have employees saying, I'm maybe in this active search mode. And we have companies large companies, who are the ones that make the papers and the headlines. More and more large companies, JP Morgan Chase just, announced here the other day, right? Everybody's come back to the office. So this whole group of job seekers that said, oh, I want to go and look for a new job for whatever reason. It's professional development, it's growth. I don't know what I want to do, how I need to get there. But there's also this, oh my gosh, my current employer has changed some term or condition of my employment and I'm no longer happy with that. So you've got those people going out there. And then you've got this uncertainty of, what's going to happen. We were kind of waiting through this uncertainty, what's going to happen with the elections. Well, now now we got to get through the inauguration and what's really going to happen. And so all of these things are happening at one time. What struck me though with this research that y'all did is, once again, we have this disconnect of what we think, and I say we, a collective we in HR, right?
Yeah.
What we think we know is not the reality when we go out and get that information from our employees. And there's always this disconnect on these sorts of topics. And why is that? How do HR leaders get at the truth earlier before employees take their little feet and walk out the door?
Yeah. And I think part of the shift that's happening in the work that HR needs to do is, and this is part of technology enablement and part of this move towards skills is also empowered by data, that this becomes increasingly continuous. So you're saying, how do we know? How do we understand? It's breaking away from cycles and schedules that were tied to, in some cases, financial reasons, but in other cases, somewhat arbitrary. Calendar, bandwidth, right? Just the ability to accomplish the work. Now with technology enablement, you get more ability to get the work done and have it done continuously, where you can get the feedback, you can get the information, you can get the insight to understand exactly what are your people saying? What are they actually entering in their career development plans? How is the work changing? How is that aligning to their career development plans, right? And all of this starts to feed into, well, how does that mean you need to adjust
Mm-hmm.
potentially your learning programs, or how
Mm-hmm.
does that mean you need to adjust your career conversations
Mm-hmm.
or your pulse check-ins as hiring managers or as HR managers, right?
And I think the really cool part about it, when you think about that, where we are now with technology and with that data and that insight that we can get as an employer, as a company, to get that just in time feedback and information. I mean, think about that's freaking cool, right? From what it used to be in the past. But we also need to maintain that. I'm going to be a futurist, right? I'm going to have that futurist outlook and be aware of what is potentially coming down the pike. We can't be too much in the moment and lose sight of, okay, maybe I do have to do some planning. I read an article yesterday, day before, talk about timely, right? From a group that just focuses on reporting on education and especially higher education. I forget their name, but this article talked about we are at this demographic cliff. We are at it, and they've been talking about this for a number of years since I think it was 2007 ish when and this was U.S. based when Americans stopped having started fewer babies coming in
Mm-hmm.
since 2007.
Sure.
Not to be like the owner of X, right, who talks about that, nothing to do with that. But we are, and so we know this is coming. We are here. This coming fall, um, we are losing 18-year-olds. There will be fewer entrants into colleges and universities coming this fall than there have ever been for many, many years. And so colleges and universities, smaller ones, are already starting to close. They've been, losing
Yeah.
enrollees and starting to close. And so, eventually, of course, what that means, we're going to have fewer graduates coming out down the road. Yet we're going to still have jobs to fill. Sheer people will still be an issue unless we, rethink immigration. So how does that come in? And so the estimate from the study was that by 2040, 2039, somewhere in there, we're going to have like 15% fewer 18-year-olds than there are now. So what does that do to our thinking? Well, one thing it gets us thinking about, which I think we'll dive into when we talk about skills, but it will get us thinking about, degree requirements, certainly. But it's a sheer numbers thing. What role is technology going to need to disrupt more and more jobs because we're going to have
Sure.
fewer people, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we live in the moment. We have to address what we're living right now, but 18 years from now, there's a heck of a lot fewer people coming out of colleges than there are
Yeah.
today.
And this slide, I was looking at this kind of within your four walls of your organization, almost, and it's hard to think of it as the micro, but almost as the micro. And this next one was kind of as the macro, and I pulled this out of the World Economic Forum jobs report that came out last week, because this is kind of now looking at this, what's happening in the world. And in a lot of the conversations I've had, we've been debating, will technology like generative AI replace workers or create jobs? And this is a little bit of an eye chart, but it's kind of trying to show the purple boxes on the left are jobs that will be, in their words, destroyed. And on the right side, the green boxes are jobs that will be created.
Mm-hmm.
And what this shows is the global employment change by 2030 in the next 5 years displaced, creating this labor market churn where you have jobs that are going to be automated away potentially, and jobs that will be created that potentially never existed before,
right,
creating an entirely new structure of work, an entirely new skills mix. And when we talk about skills gap, we talk about redeployment, but you also saw the previous slide of people saying they're looking for new work,
Mm-hmm.
we may not necessarily know as individuals what that new work is, or even as organizations what that new work is.
Right.
So this is when people said, "Hey Jason, what's your prediction for 2025?" I said, "My prediction for 2025 is 2025 is going to be hard to predict."
Well,
Right?
and this, because for a number of years I've watched year over year as the World Economic Forum has kind of come out with the rise of technology and kind of their predictions around what jobs are going to look like in the future. And it's fascinating to go back and look at the reports from 10 years ago and see how things have come true that they said.
Sure.
Um, but I think that this, when you dive into and think about what those jobs of the future can be 2 years from now, right? Jobs of the future look like. It does get us thinking about when we talk about skill-based hiring or upskilling or reskilling our current workers. It takes us to that second step of, well, what are the current skills, perhaps skills that we need in our organization or in a group of jobs, but it's also what are the future skills we need, and we need to make sure we're
Correct.
thinking about that, because this type of information lets us know, those jobs that will not be replaced, or fully replaced, let's say, by some sort of
Sure.
technology, are the jobs that require, empathy and active listening and creativity and things of that nature, self-awareness, motivation, whatnot. It's those innately human characteristics. So how do we develop those? And what fascinates me when I think about that is those are often the skills that back in the day the soft skills, right?
Sure. Yeah.
um what does that what does that mean? How do we think about skills, yes, for now but also for the future?
And if you're a organization or an HR leader looking at something like this, or trying to start rethinking or redesigning work or looking at your jobs, this can become overwhelming. And
Yeah.
you mentioned, the jobs that will remain, or the skills that can be applied towards the new
Yeah.
the sustaining roles, right? And this makes me think. At the end of 2024, I attended the Gartner Reimagine HR conference. And I myself am a Gartner alumni, so I always go back and try to take notes on what's their latest thinking. And
Hmm.
um, one of the keynotes, they were sharing some sample kind of leadership strategy from, I believe the company was Walters Kluwer, and they were talking about this concept of, they were looking at it and how to tackle this in terms of the concept of dynamic jobs and static jobs. And they were
Mm-hmm.
saying dynamic jobs are jobs where things like generative AI and technology will change the job entirely. Static
Yeah.
jobs are jobs where the work is going to get done differently,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But even in that, the framing it as a static job doesn't mean it's not changing also,
Right.
right? So the whole point of this is HR people that are in this line of work, thinking about work design and org design and talent management and talent acquisition, need to get used to the fact that
Mm-hmm.
if you're just coming to grips with how your job in HR is changing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we have to understand how all of the functions and
Mm-hmm.
disciplines that we support are
Mm-hmm.
also changing, right? And how do we get visibility to that data and understand how
Mm-hmm.
that's happening, because it's happening,
Yep.
whether we think it is or not.
And I had this thought a couple of weeks ago. This was around the holidays, and I don't know where I saw this online. It was this online discussion in, like, Reddit or something, I don't know. I was just following along. And someone was complaining, as people tend to do online, right? And this message board. And someone was complaining, oh, I was out doing my holiday shopping, and oh, I was so frustrated, because while she was ringing me up, the clerk was, on her phone. And so somebody was like, well, was she rude? No, she said hello to me. Did she ring you up correctly? Yeah, she bring me up correctly, made no errors. But she was on her phone, and I really, back in my day, you didn't do that. And it got me thinking about, and that's there's an interaction that many of us have, and we have seen that interaction with clerks in a store change tremendously over time. Um, used to be, not that long ago, but if you went to some sort of service establishment, a restaurant, a store, whatever, people were fired. If employees would be fired if their cell phone was sticking out of their pocket, right? I mean, that was just horrible. Now we expect them. Yes, she was on her phone, but you know what? Her employer probably expects her to have her phone there because there are work tools on that phone that she's been required to
Sure.
download, and she needs to be on that phone to be able to do her job. And that has changed very quickly. And we haven't, as consumers, as the customers of these stores, we haven't necessarily stopped to think about that or realize that.
Sure.
And so it's, as these things change so rapidly, and there's just sort of an offshoot after effect of the job, the technology, how the person interacts with the technology, what that trickle down is. That's in our face every day, and people don't realize why that changed, how that's changed. That clerk is not being rude. That clerk is not being inattentive to you. The way she has to do her job now has changed.
Changed. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to transition to the next topic around empowering internal mobility. And it's funny, where I know of solutions that are delivered through the phone, especially for deskless workers, where
Yes.
that's where
Yep.
they're getting
Yep.
their training from. That's where they're getting
Yep.
their learning from. Or in some cases, the organizations are requesting feedback from the
Yep.
field through the phone in real time, right?
Yep.
But around empowering internal mobility, if they were developing an internal marketplace, the internal marketplace could also be delivered through the phone.
Yep.
Many organizations are trying to develop this, often talk about first, how are they defining it? Because in many cases, people often just think this is employees applying for jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this has a much broader definition,
Yeah.
right? It really is. Could be projects, it could be gigs, it could be a variety of different ways of mentoring and learning. It could be this whole concept through like the Robin Jesse Thiessen work without jobs, the John Boudreau kind of thought leadership there, with
Mm-hmm.
flowing towards work and more organizational agility. But this is something we've been talking about for 10, 20 years, this project-based employment.
Yes.
And there's one way to think about it when you think about freelancers or gig workers working on projects themselves, but within the construct of an organization and how you do that on the same payroll, on the same paycheck, within the same four
Mm-hmm.
walls, real or virtual, still
Mm-hmm.
has been something people are trying to get their arms around.
Mm-hmm.
Before we jump into the few slides we have here, do you have an immediate reaction to this topic,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe some of the conversations you've been having?
Yeah. No, it is. It is yet another one of those things that is, I think people are still struggling with. How do we set this up to be robust and meaningful beyond some of the things that I think we'll see on the slide, where we talk about, okay, we're transparent with our job openings, and we're letting people try out and a new gig or be mentored. um, I see it. I've long called it, the need to adopt work, and treat it as the Hollywood model, which is
Yes.
treating work
Yes.
as if we're we're making a movie, and
Sure.
we're no longer in the studio system where everybody's an employee of the studio, right? Before I'm going to make a movie or a TV show or whatever, I bring together these talented people from different areas, bring them together, We make our movie or our TV show, and then they go on and they go make the next movie.
Yes.
And it's thinking about it that way, which is hard for organizations to do. Um, and I think where I've seen it, where organizations are find it easier to do are those who have been used to either um, allocating people's costs in some sort of labor model um, already, right? Oh, you've got billable hours. Oh, that's easy enough to move you here, there, and the other way. Or where they have multi jobs, if you will. So I've worked for several over the course of my career, several casinos, and so we had restaurants and we had, all the bells and whistles, right? But it was very easy because we could develop. You wouldn't think of that in that sort of fast-paced, service-oriented sort of organization, but we developed this internal without even calling it that. We were very good at internal mobility and developing people and helping them get skill sets that they wanted in some other area because it was easy enough for us to say, okay, Susie, you want to learn what it's like to work, in security, and instead of, in food and beverage. Okay, as long as
Sure.
you have the right gaming badge and you can get whatever, we can have you start. Maybe you're multi-jobbed, we called it, right? And you get a shift or two over here, and if you don't like it, no big deal. You come back and stay working in food and beverage. I mean, so those are the types of organizations that I think have done this for years, but don't even think about calling it internal mobility.
Yeah. I used to lead talent acquisition for a big conglomerate, and it had multiple divisions. And I always used to love to read the leadership executive announcements on our intranet, and they would always provide kind of their career
Yeah,
history. And there usually was they had worked in multiple divisions,
yeah,
and almost every time they may have done an international assignment. And
yeah,
as part of that, we would have these development programs that would try to repeat that and develop leadership rotational
yeah,
assignments and go across divisions and maybe have an international assignment, all these different things. And I think part of what we're trying to enable with some of these new capabilities and new technologies is the ability to do some of that at scale,
yes,
right? So how do you unlock that for people, and make the organization more transparent for what paths they could have,
yes,
and maybe break down some of those requirements for some untraditional ways of achieving that. If someone
yeah,
can't do the international stint or
yeah,
can't relocate their family or all those different
yeah,
things. And funny you mentioned the Hollywood model. At Eightfold here, we have a very popular name in the Hollywood movie making industry who's a client, and we offer talent acquisition and talent management and contingent staffing functionality, and they approach it that way, right? They
mhm,
when they're working on building a movie, whether you have the key grip or the craft services or all those things, people that are part of your organization, but then you
yep,
also bring people
yep,
that are brought to the project and then
yep,
move on to the next project.
yep,
So the way they look at talent is very kind of dynamic and agile.
yep, yep. And I think another aspect of strengthening one's internal mobility, again, is to kind of look to the world of consulting, right? um, where as an organization, if I would, in order to allow people to go try something new or go take this, go on a rotation or try in a new assignment for 6 months or whatever, as an organization, in order to allow people to do that, I need to have built an internal bench, if you will, right? So that, Bob in accounting can step away and go for 10 months to marketing or whatever. Bob's work still needs to be done. Do I have that bench strength, right? Do I have
Yeah.
other folks I can deploy there? And so it's thinking about that because it's overcoming. And then there's a cultural component to it, which is
Yeah.
the managers of the Bobs of the world um, tend to want to hoard who they have.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing to overcome when you're looking at saying we really want to promote and be this culture where we develop and we grow people and we let them try new things and all of that. The first group you've got to convince and get on board are the managers in there who feel that well, I've hired somebody and now I'm going to lose them, and they try to hoard.
Yep. So this goes back to that same survey that we mentioned that we conducted, and this
Mm-hmm.
was asking those employees to provide their levels of importance against their levels of satisfaction with the tools that were provided. And one of the things that jumps out here is the quadrant on the top left are the
Mm-hmm.
things that were the most important to them,
Mm-hmm.
but were also the lowest in satisfaction.
Yeah.
And if you look at the topics, they're all related to promotion and mobility.
Yeah.
So opportunities for promotion, transparent promotion and career development process, the opportunities to pivot into new roles,
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to work on projects outside of their existing roles. So this is around the ability to have the opportunity to see over the wall, right? To see and understand how they map to the organization. And I
Mm-hmm.
think part of this deals with communication, part of this deals with transparency, part of this deals with
Mm-hmm.
how these job ladders and job families and competencies have been built historically.
Yes.
Um, and if people are having trouble understanding how they fit to the organization today, and the organization is having trouble predict where it's going to be in the future,
Mm-hmm.
people are having trouble predict where they're going to be in the organization in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So all
Yeah.
of this leads to that disconnect on that previous slide.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been talking about, and I've kind of lived this personally, is I think it's this shift from these strategies around pipelines, because back when I was leading talent acquisition, I had a specific remit to deal with critical skill and diversity pipeline strategies.
Yes.
And I think even that name pipeline, specific outcome in a specific direction, going to a specific place. And I
Yes.
think when you're talking about internal mobility and you're talking about a marketplace and you're thinking beyond jobs and you're breaking down kind of how these promotion based career architectures have been built, you start to enable things like more of a portfolio strategy
Mm-hmm.
that allows for this type of movement,
Mm-hmm.
especially as organizations are increasingly becoming horizontal and starting
Mm-hmm.
to remove layers. But I think the other reason why I'm thinking along this way is because that previous chart from World Economic Forum of those green jobs that
Yep.
are
Yep.
going to be created are increasingly these green circles that are not visible today, that are going to appear
Mm-hmm.
in between jobs, in between
Mm-hmm.
functions. Like I think the jobs of the future are increasingly hybrid roles that may not
Mm-hmm.
exist today, that are something in between HR and IT and finance, or in between ops and sales and supply chain,
Yes.
or some mix of functions and technologies, right? Maybe it's caught my ear because of the work I do, but I'm hearing that one of the new roles on the leadership team is a chief transformation officer. What department or discipline does that role come from? Is that an
Right.
HR job? Is that an operations job? Is that an IT job? Is that a
Right.
finance job? It's probably a mix of all of that.
Right.
So I think shifting the mindset and kind of creating this structure that allows for the agility is
Mm-hmm.
a part of kind of this new operating system.
Mm-hmm. And I think
Any
one of the cool things that smaller organizations get to do, and because they're more nimble, right? And as you're growing and you're adding positions, it's a whole different world than you've got 10,000 employees and you are what you are. But I think out of that and out of that portfolio concept comes more and more people like more and more employees, candidates, or existing employees creating their own jobs as well. And so I think it's organizations being open to that. Part of that portfolio concept is the powers that be, whether that be the department leaders, whether that be, you know, HR, where they are in the mix of those conversations, finance when they're budgeting these things, is as part of that internal mobility, do you have the openness for your employees to come and say, um, I, I want to create something. I want to create this job that doesn't exist. And you listen to them and you maybe realize that's one of those invisible green circles there.
Yeah. So that brings us into our next section, which is kind of shifting to this skills-based talent management approach,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of looking at this through the lens both from the employee experience as well as from the organization experience. And I'm going to go back to our friends over at the World Economic Forum. I pulled another chart from their report, kind of starting at the macro, but this was their chart around disruption to skills. And again, this was progression over time. So from 2016 to 2025. But this 2025 kind of bar on the right-hand side was from a 2024 survey. But this just shows the evolution of kind of the mix of skills, with core skills, which will remain the same, and skills that will change. And I think even with this turbulence, this 2025 bar is coming from 2024 before we saw kind of the expedited adoption and expedited learning of generative AI.
Yeah.
Right. We didn't think it would take off this fast for all the use cases and outcomes and just the exponential way that it's learning. Right. So I think if we were to look at this today with real data, real time data, the disruption may even be more severe. But I think this is why, going back to that misalignment, moving to more continuous strategies and learning from the data and getting feedback in real time is so important, right? To break from the cyclical and the annual. I was having a conversation with Betsy Summers, who you know from Forrester, who leads some of their thought leadership there, and we were talking about, when you think about the concept of skills intelligence and talent intelligence, it creates the ability to not just kind of lead from top down, but learn from the organization from the bottom up.
Yes.
And kind of test and retest and kind of meet the business in the middle, right? What's your reaction to that? Do you think that's something realistic, or do you think that's challenging?
No, I do think that's realistic, and I think that becomes that's like the first step, really, and it's almost like saying it's okay to do. You make this plan. How am I going to start sort of adjusting, right, and thinking about skills? I need to have a plan because, okay, maybe I need to go and present it to my, C-suite, whatever, if we're going to start going down this path. But it's like beta testing. It's like a pilot, right? And so starting with those steps, there's a department, or there's a group of jobs, or there's a program that's in a part of the business. Maybe that's hard to recruit for, has high turnover, whatever it is, right? And so I think I think that becomes the first step. That's the first hurdle, is as I start to explore skill-based hiring, it's okay to start small.
Yeah.
And instead of biting off the whole, oh my gosh, let me create this skill taxonomy for, the 3,000 jobs I have in my organization. Okay, let's focus on whatever, this group in IT or whatever it might be.
And with skills intelligence, you can do things like dynamic career pathing, where based off of people's profiles and as they're adding skills, they can start using the technology to
Yep.
develop these career plans, but those career plans aren't static, and this is no longer being done in a spreadsheet.
Right.
So as their profiles change and as their skills
Right.
compile, it's also being done in a data set where, as the roles are changing and the roles evolve,
Mm-hmm.
all of this becomes a living, breathing thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is it's also showing them how to get there and providing learning opportunities
Yep.
and mentoring opportunities. But as the journey changes, it's always showing them how it's changing and what's in it for them, and
Mm-hmm.
also potentially introducing those new roles that may or may not exist yet. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be a posted role. It could
Mm-hmm.
be something the
Mm-hmm.
organization's planning for.
Yep. And I think that is so key to the conversation around skills-based talent.
Yeah.
Because when we started talking about this, right, X number of years ago, skills based hiring. And yes, that's part of it, because that's part of shifting. Oh, maybe I don't need a degree because I'm looking at skills, whatever, the degrees are, perhaps not, the be all and end all, whatever. So we think about skills based hiring becomes the default, but it doesn't end with hiring,
Right.
to your point, and creating um that company, ethos where, that skills are developed and championed and understood because they are living and breathing, and we can dive in and take a look at that and understand that
So
evolution while it's happening.
So I think that's part of kind of the next section around building a learning culture.
Yeah.
And in the past, I've heard this kind of phrased as, how do you, from an employee perspective or a personal perspective, how do you learn to earn? And I just saw this a day or two ago from kind of an organizational perspective. How do you build a learning culture to learn to avoid the churn? Right. So use whatever rhyming technique or
Right.
alliteration or phrase you want. But I think this is a big part of what we're talking about. But also, when you start to do this and you use this data and you use this in real time and you're using it with a dynamic tool like we just saw,
Mm-hmm.
you're also not necessarily pushing out learning. You start to get a pull
Mm-hmm.
of requests for learning and programming for what people need,
Mm-hmm.
based off of how this mapping and how these connections are being drawn, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this starts to operate very differently. From that same annual survey that we did, we had 69% of HR leaders told us that they're concerned about the rapid pace of change and evolving employee needs. So I think that's why
Yeah.
this ability to have the data and have the feedback and have the input is so important, but also why it's important to recognize and understand some of these economic factors, these market
Mm-hmm.
factors, and these organizational factors that are happening all at the same time.
Yes.
For the organizations that you're dealing with, how do they avoid not boiling the ocean? Do they try to break this up into small pieces? Is there something that they maybe address first, or?
Yeah, I think I see that more and more, actually. Um, and I'm thinking in different iterations. There's one group I'm working with right now that it's a technology implementation, but of course, as we know, with work technology implementation comes, it's the change management piece, it's the the pre-work that gets done, all that. And the beauty of it is this organization realized, now, would it be lovely to have everything ready and turned on by, June 1st, let's say? Sure. But the reality was, okay, let's take our time, let's think it through, because there's this pre-work and this ongoing work as part of the process, so that there's kind of these different iterations to the project plan as we go down this path. And
Sure.
so it's not, here it is, let's launch, let's, implement whatever, this operational change or a technology or whatever. Um, that it's okay to kind of do this thoughtful approach, spread it out a little bit more, and realize you're going to do some different iterations along the way. And so I think
Right.
that becomes part of, yes, whether it's a system, whether it's a process, whether it's a wholesale kind of philosophical change, that, yeah, have a plan, but be agile. You don't have to do it all at once. Yes, HR leader, especially when somebody's new at an organization, this is new HR leaders are the best and the worst. They're their own worst enemies sometimes because they're new to the organization, they're new to their role, they are so excited. They've just come out of an interview with all these things that are priorities, from the C-suite, and they're so excited because they're the person chosen to come in and lead this. And I've had many a conversation with HR leaders over time where I've said, okay, calm down. This
Yeah.
all doesn't need to be done in quarter one or quarter two while you're there. You need to stop and map it out. And so, yeah, it's easy to be overwhelmed. And
So there's a key word you said there around iterations. The new kind of a continuous of evolution of the idea, the concept, the process, right? So
yeah.
moving from kind of product managing and program managing something that you designed in a lab that's going to live forever, to kind of iterating a process that takes different shapes and evolves based on
Mm-hmm.
feedback and getting
Mm-hmm.
information. And
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to kind of take different shapes and kind of see the world as it's taking form,
Yes.
versus how everything had to be neat and tidy and I's dotted and T's crossed in the HR world that I grew up in, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, Getting back to your kind of senior leader comments there, one of the things that also came out of our annual survey, we had asked those 500 HR leaders, how frequently are you involved in overall business strategy? 52% of them said they're frequently involved in overall business strategy with their C-suite peers.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had asked, how frequently are you collaborating with your C-suite peers? And 50% of them said they're frequently collaborating with their C-suite peers. And then we had asked, how well do you feel your strategy is aligned with business objectives? 44% said they felt that their strategy was so strongly aligned with business objectives, which isn't that great, right? Obviously, you'd want it to be higher.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the key thing that we found in that survey was, across that population, only 18% of that audience answered in those buckets to all three.
Right.
So the misalignment around kind of involvement and collaboration and alignment, right? So all of these things are weighing on the execution. So nature, the iterations, the learning culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? All of this is
Mm-hmm.
kind of dealing with uncertainty is a big
Yeah.
part of what HR is going to be working
Yeah.
with in 2025.
Yeah.
With that, I do want to move on to kind of harnessing technology to drive
Mm-hmm.
success as we head home here. I do have one last poll. Where do you see technology and AI making the biggest impact in your organization? So we have a couple options here: recruitment and TA, upskilling and reskilling, talent management and retention, reducing bias and improving decision making, or optimizing workflows and productivity. Again, we get to watch the horse race here. If people can,
That's right. I love
take
the
a
horse
moment.
race.
Yep. Take a moment and pick a horse. Where do you see technology and AI making the biggest impact in your organization?
All
Do you
the
have a horse in this race?
all the recruiters and TA professionals on the call are cheering for A to come through at the front.
Do you have a horse in this race, Robin?
I think we are still, by and large, optimizing workflows and productivity. I think we're still there.
I'm not sure if our audience will pick that, but I think there's definitely a large audience in the organizational HR world that
Mm-hmm.
would pick that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see how we did. We have
Just look
optimizing
at all those
workflows and
defenders.
productivity to the front.
Look at me. Look at that. I win.
But I think part of this is it's the immediate promise of the technology. I think part of this is
Yes.
people are tasked with
Yes.
doing more with less,
Yes.
right? Especially in HR.
Yep.
We're all working with smaller teams.
Yep.
Even relative to scale, if organizations are growing, the ratio is smaller, right?
Yep.
So part of this is it definitely is finding the right use cases and understanding the problem to solve. I think part of this is using the technology in a more continuous way. I think it's understanding that there are different flavors of AI. I think it's understanding that there's different layers to this. I think to bring it home more specifically for us here at Eightfold, we have kind of this concept of guiding the process with the user experience, but then the data layer underneath, and this becoming a dynamic, living, breathing thing where you have the skills profile, you have recommendations, you have a future role, but underneath it, you have this curated data set that's informed by talent intelligence and skills intelligence and market insights. So it's incorporating the macro and the micro. It's incorporating the hopes and wishes of the person with kind of the strategies and needs of the organization. And it's trying to bring these things together in concert to align in a more agile way so they have a greater chance of meeting in the future. And I think this is increasingly how organizations are going to have to operate in an uncertain future, because when we talk about shorter shelf life, there's a shorter shelf life on everything. The windows of predictions and plans and strategies are getting shorter and shorter because the iterations and the gaps are getting broader faster. Right?
And I think where this is like the so exciting part, right, about using technology. And so I think even going back to that survey, where I see the and it's moving faster than we really even thought it would a couple of years ago. But let's optimize workflows and productivity and for all the factors, all the things that go into why that's happening, that is happening very quickly. Like within organizations, within HR operations, right? The adoption of technology and AI into processes and to adjust things is happening now. The things that Eightfold can do, people are getting to this quicker than ever now, because we're getting past all right, I can see very quickly we've adopted in HR the possibilities of technology and AI, and seeing what it can do that's where we are, and this is being adopted quickly.
So I appreciate your participation and joining us for the conversation, Robin. This has been a lot of fun. Would love to do it again for you and have you join us. And thank you for everyone who joined us on the other side of the camera here. We appreciate everyone that's listened along, or people that may watch the recording at some other time. Appreciate everyone joining us, and we'll see you again for another session. But thank you, everyone, and back to you, Callie and the Eightfold team.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Thank you, Robin, for joining us as well and sharing your insights with us. And we hope to see you all soon on our next webinar. Thanks and have a great day.